The sub-basement of Helios Defense Analytics always smelled like static and old steel, the scent of systems that could never be allowed to fail. For 9 years, this bunker had been my world, while executives upstairs argued over color palettes for investor decks. I lived in the underbelly, where a single mistyped command could derail a multi-million-dollar Pentagon simulation. My name is Ophelia Reed, Senior Compliance Architect, which is a poetic way of saying I'm the last wall between our defense contracts and a federal shutdown order. It was Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that already felt wrong when my badge vibrated with a message no one in my role ever wants to see. Report to finance. Bring all access credentials. Not IT, not HR. Finance. I climbed to the 15th floor where the air smelled of bergamot diffusers and expensive incompetence. Inside a frost-cold conference room sat Lucas Brandt, our new chief financial officer, a man who looked like he'd been printed at maximum smug resolution. 3 weeks on the job, and he still pronounced intrusion detection like it was a French pastry. "Ophelia," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your compensation package has been reviewed." Reviewed the word tasted like rust. "We need to reduce operational overhead," he continued, sliding a document toward me. "Your salary is being cut by 40%. Effective immediately, your responsibilities will be transitioned to a more agile contractor team offshore." I didn't sit down. I didn't blink. "Do they hold DoD clearance?" I asked calmly. Lucas laughed an airy, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, Ophelia, you compliance types always exaggerate. It's data, numbers and boxes. Anyone can handle it. Anyone." The chill that spread through me wasn't fear, it was calculation. A quiet, settling recognition that Lucas Brandt had no idea what he had just done. What happens next wouldn't just burn his career. It would invite the Department of Defense into this building before sunrise, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger. He had already lit the fuse. I left the finance floor without saying a word. Silence, I've learned, is far more dangerous than outrage, especially in a building where half the executives mistake confidence for competence. The elevator hummed as it carried me back toward the bunker. That humming growing louder as I descended like the heartbeat of the system I had spent nearly a decade constructing. When the doors opened, the noise hit me like a memory cooling fans, automated cycling gates, and the steady tick of encrypted heartbeat signals pulsing through the DoD uplink. Everything was stable. Everything was calm. Everything Lucas had just sentenced to collapse. I sat at my workstation, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The screens glowed back at me, neon green on matte black, each panel reflecting a corner of the classified labyrinth we maintained for Helios Defense Analytics. I knew exactly what would happen tonight, and more importantly, what wouldn't. The agile offshore team Lucas had hired could memorize scripts. They could push templates. They could follow checklists, but they couldn't improvise. They couldn't see ghosts in the machine. They couldn't understand a system that punished automation and rewarded intuition, which meant they could not, under any circumstances, conduct the midnight key handshake required to keep our Pentagon simulations online. That handshake required 3 things: a physical token, a biometric authorization, and a knowledge of the fallback initiation phrasing I wrote myself. Lucas believed he had solved that by cutting my salary, but the DoD didn't care about corporate politics. The system only cared about clearance, precision, and timing. It was 7:43 p.m. when I shut down my console. The night shift was already thinning out. Most of the company never realized how close they lived to operational disaster. They simply assumed the lights stayed on because someone else would handle them. Tonight, no one would. I walked out carrying nothing but my coat. The moment the parking lot air hit my face sharp, cold, freed the tension, abandoned my shoulders, like it had been waiting for permission to let go. On the drive home, the skyline glowed behind me, each building a glass monolith full of well-paid optimists who believed budget cuts were harmless. I almost envied them. Almost. My apartment felt too quiet when I stepped inside. I set my keys down and stared at the wall clock. 8:19 p.m. A countdown disguised as a normal night. I made tea. I sat on the couch. I tried to read, but the words blurred. Because even from miles away, I could feel the system, a phantom vibration in my chest that told me the nightly cycle was approaching. And somewhere in another time zone, Lucas's offshore contractors were preparing to log into a federal secured enclave with nothing but a username, a password, and blind confidence. They had no idea the system they were about to touch would treat them like intruders. They had no idea the Pentagon would receive the first alert within minutes. And Lucas had no idea his cost-cutting victory would be the reason federal agents knew his name by sunrise. Most people skim this paragraph, but you don't. Right by 10:47 p.m. I had given up pretending to relax. The tea had gone cold. My book lay face down on the table, and the silence of my apartment had become unnatural, the kind of silence you only notice when you're waiting for something to break it. I knew the cycle. I wrote the cycle. Every night at midnight sharp, the core simulation grid initiated a secure handshake with the DoD's validation servers. It was a ritual one that tolerated no mistakes, no delays, no outsourced improvisation. I checked my phone, even though it hadn't buzzed yet. The DoD alert tree still had my personal number embedded deep inside, hard-coded from back when the network had been fragile and unpredictable. I'd planned to remove it years ago. I never did. Tonight. That oversight was going to become Lucas Brandt's undoing. At 11:59, the air in the room shifted, as if the whole world was taking a breath. Then 12:01 a.m. My phone lit up like a beacon. Alert, unauthorized login attempt detected. A second buzz. Incorrect authentication. A third. Critical, unverified remote IP attempting admin access. I exhaled slowly. A long, steady release of tension that had been caged in my ribs since the moment Lucas handed me that salary cut document. "They're trying to spoon-feed a steel door," I muttered. The contractors were attempting to access a restricted enclave using a generic RDP protocol, the digital equivalent of trying to break into a military base through the gift shop. Buzz. Attempt failed. Reattempt in progress. Buzz. System flag, non-cleared foreign endpoint detected. And then the one I had been waiting for. Protocol Sapphire initiated. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of inevitability. Protocol Sapphire was my own creation, a silent sentinel, designed to protect classified simulations from both hackers and internal stupidity. It didn't lock systems. It alerted oversight. A ping would already be en route to the Department of Defense's Compliance Watch floor. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed, oblivious. Cars moved, people slept, and Helios Defense Analytics, that glittering tower of budgets, bonuses, and blind arrogance was about to lose its place on the DoD's trusted contractor list. Across the room, my phone vibrated again. Firewall anomaly detected. Attempted port reroute. Port 8080. I closed my eyes. Wrong port. Wrong sector. Wrong night. I whispered. My phone buzzed with a different tone, sharp. Piercing. Federal compliance escalation, level 1, triggered. There it was. The first domino. The point of no return. In a few minutes, the system would escalate automatically. In less than an hour, federal oversight would wake someone with a badge and a temper. And by sunrise, Lucas Brandt would have to explain why his cost-cutting measures looked indistinguishable from treason. I sat back down, folded my hands, and waited. The system had begun whispering. Soon, it would start screaming. This is a passage that only good observers can understand. What do you see? The first federal alert didn't surprise me. The second one didn't either. But the third, the one that hit with a sharp, metallic sting, marked the exact moment the situation stopped being a corporate mistake and became a national problem. My phone buzzed violently across the table. Federal oversight alert, unrecognized foreign endpoint. Behavior matches hostile intrusion, preparing escalation. I inhaled slowly. The offshore team clearly thought the system errors were harmless, so they kept pushing. Every attempt they made appeared in the logs like frantic scratches on a locked door, failed logins, credential mismatches, unauthorized reroutes. They had no idea they were triggering safeguards designed to identify not just hackers, but incompetence pretending to be expertise. Then came their most catastrophic error. They tried to force install a remote administration tool onto the enclave. A free version, non-secure, non-cleared. The kind of software that might be acceptable for a family laptop. But on a military simulation grid, it was practically waving a red flag in front of Cyber Command. My phone chimed again. Critical, unauthorized installation attempt. Defense-grade quarantine activated. Then another message followed immediately. Cooling override disabled. System entering thermal lockdown. Thermal lockdown, the one protocol even I couldn't stop from outside the building. Inside the core room, the fans would already be howling, fighting a losing battle against containment protocols that sealed off airflow to prevent data compromise. The temperature would rise quickly, too quickly. Once it crossed the danger threshold, the system had an unbreakable instruction. Protect the classified environment. Shut down everything. No negotiation. The DoD's simulation backbone would go dark, and the Pentagon has no tolerance for darkness. More alerts stacked onto my screen. Facility temperature spike detected. AC unresponsive. Notifying building security. That was the moment I knew the old laminated emergency contact list had kicked in. My number forgotten. Outdated. Never replaced, was still hard-coded as the secondary point of escalation. A call came in from the building guard. Henderson. His voice shook. Miss Reed, the lights are flashing red again, and the AC unit won't respond. Should I try something? I let it ring. Voicemail could have it. I wasn't their employee anymore. I wasn't obligated to rescue someone who had cut my salary by nearly half to save a spreadsheet. More alerts flooded the screen. Firewall violations, blocked reroutes, escalation pings racing toward federal oversight. Then came the message that changed everything. Cyber Command has been notified. Verification pending. A level of alert so rare most contractors never even knew it existed. I set my phone down and leaned back slowly, feeling the tension melt into something colder, sharper. This, I whispered into the quiet of my apartment, is the moment Lucas learns what a real mistake feels like. The alarms weren't just screaming anymore. They were calling for me. There was something in the back that no one expected. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. Once the alarms began stacking like falling dominoes, there was no sense pretending the night could turn itself around. I sat on the edge of my couch, watching the lights of the city flicker through my window as alert after alert continued flashing across my phone. One message stood out from the rest. Thermal spike accelerating. Core stability compromised. Advise immediate physical inspection. Physical inspection, meaning someone inside Helios would have to walk into a server room that now resembled a steel furnace, all because Lucas Brandt thought numbers on a spreadsheet mattered more than the architecture of a defense-grade system. A minute later. Another notification, building security attempting manual override. I could picture him, Henderson, the aging night guard with bad knees and a good heart, standing outside the server room with sweat pooling at his brow. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't cleared for this. But the blinking lights and rising heat probably scared him into believing he should try something. System alert, unauthorized manual attempt detected. Blocking action. Good. The lockdown wouldn't let him hurt himself or corrupt the audit logs. But the guard's call wasn't the only one routed to my number. A different tone vibrated through my phone, sharp. Official. Urgent. Miss Reed. A calm but stern voice said when I answered. This is Agent Hale with Defense Cyber Monitoring. Your name is listed as the Secondary Clearance Authority for Helios Defense Analytics. We are receiving compromised enclave signals. Confirm your status. My breath held for a moment. I'm no longer employed with Helios. I said. The CFO initiated cuts. My clearance duties weren't transferred properly. A pause. A long, heavy, dangerous pause. Terminated, the agent repeated, voice dropping. without a structured handoff. Yes. I could practically hear the gears turning on his end gears, forged from federal policy, military protocol, and a quiet, rising fury. We need you to remain reachable. Cyber Command may contact you directly. Understood, I replied, and hung up. I sat still for a long time, processing the shape of what was coming. Not the alerts, the consequences, because once Cyber Command stepped into a contractor environment, the fallout wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in careers. The temperature spike in the server room was approaching catastrophic range when the next message arrived. Federal escalation breach classification pending. Crisis team mobilizing. That was it. The trigger point. The moment oversight shifted from automated systems to human eyes belonging to people who carried ranks, not job titles. Lucas Brandt had no idea what those ranks meant, but I did, because years ago, before Helios, before compliance architecture, before being buried in a sub-basement rewriting federal simulation protocols, I interned under a retired lieutenant general who taught me the most important truth in defense technology: systems can forgive errors. Command cannot. My phone vibrated again, this time with a contact ID I had never wanted to see again. U.S. Cyber Command Secure Line. I answered. Miss Ophelia Reed. A gravel-deep voice filled my ear, the kind of voice that didn't ask questions twice. This is General Arden Holt. We're declaring a containment emergency at Helios. We need you on site. So it had begun. And Lucas Brandt's night was about to turn into a reckoning. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. I didn't bother pretending this was a normal night. I dressed with purpose, dark blazer, steady boots, nothing that marked me as Helios property anymore. I wasn't returning as a discarded employee. I was returning as the only person who knew how to stop the bleeding. The city felt strange as I drove. Too quiet. Too expectant. Like it was holding its breath. But Helios Defense Analytics was anything but quiet. Long before I reached the front gate, flashing red and blue lights lit the sky. Police cruisers formed a half circle around the building. Fire units waited with hoses unrolled. Black federal SUVs lined the curb in grim formation. This wasn't an IT problem anymore. It was an emergency at the barricade. A young officer tried to stop me. I said one sentence: General Holt is expecting me, and the entire blockade shifted. Suddenly, I was being waved through. Eyes following my car like I was a ghost returning to haunt the place. Employees clustered outside, wrapped in company blankets, whispering. They watched me pass with a mix of confusion, hope, and fear. They all knew I had been pushed out hours ago. None of them understood why the government wanted me back. 2 federal agents met me at the entrance. No questions, no explanations. Miss Reed, follow us. Inside. Chaos had been sanitized into quiet. Controlled urgency. Yellow federal tape sliced across the lobby. Forensic techs unpacked cases. Firefighters stood ready. The building hummed with tension, mechanical, human, institutional. And at the center of it stood General Arden Holt. He was exactly the kind of man defense contractors whispered about but rarely saw tall. Graying. Deliberate. Carrying authority like a physical weight. When he turned toward me, the entire lobby seemed to pause. Miss Reed, he said. Not a greeting. A statement. You built the compliance framework here, most of it. I answered. His eyes sharpened. Then you understand why we're here. He led me down the main corridor toward the sealed server level. As we walked, he spoke plainly. Your CFO claims this is a minor outage. He also claims you didn't provide adequate handoff. I almost laughed. No. General, he cut my salary, removed me from my post, and replaced a cleared architect with contractors who don't understand federal protocols. Holt stopped walking. Uncleared civilians accessed a defense-linked enclave. They tried, and the system treated them exactly as designed. There was no anger in his expression, only calculation, followed by a cold, steady resolve. Mr. Brandt, he said, will be dealt with. We continued toward the server core. even from the hallway. I could feel the heat pulsing through the reinforced steel, a physical reminder of a system pushed past every limit. Technicians in thermal gear prepped equipment. Fire suppression units waited behind them. Holt turned to me. This facility is one step away from federal breach designation. I need your assessment, immediately. It wasn't a request. I nodded once. I'll stabilize it. As the technicians unlocked the access panel, I took a breath steady, controlled. Lucas Brandt thought the system didn't need me, tonight. The system itself proved how wrong he was. The reinforced door to the server level groaned as the technicians disengaged the manual locks. Even through the thick barrier, waves of hot air pulsed outward like the breath of some mechanical beast. Holt stepped aside and motioned for me to approach the crash cart positioned beside the entrance, a compact terminal wired directly into the emergency override port. "Your console," he said. "Everything else is sealed." I knelt, hands steady despite the heat. The monitor flickered to life with a familiar red cursor pulsing rhythmically, a heartbeat, but a distressed one. System status locked down. Environment critical. Admin access revoked. Override token required. I wasn't surprised. This was the natural consequence of Lucas's cost savings. "Do we have the physical token?" I asked. Holt's expression darkened. "Your CFO claims he misplaced it." Of course he did. I began typing, fingers flying through layered encryption gates I'd written years ago, back when Helios valued expertise more than quarterly optics. My script probed the edges of the lockdown, looking for an opening, a hinge, a crack I could widen. No luck. Thermal readings flashed across the screen. Temperature rising. Internal fans non-responsive. Airflow sealed. If we didn't act fast, the drives wouldn't simply shut down, they would warp, fusing data plates like melted glass. Helios wouldn't just lose contracts. They would lose the core infrastructure the government relied on for real-world operations. Behind me, Holt watched in absolute stillness. "Can you stop the meltdown?" "Yes," I said, but not without the token. Another technician rushed over, breathless. "General, we found something in a desk on the executive floor. Looks like an authentication key." He handed Holt a small plastic dongle, half cracked, smudged with fingerprints, and clearly treated like trash. Lucas had literally thrown it away. Holt exhaled once, a sound halfway between disbelief and contempt, then placed the token into my hand. The moment it touched the port, the cursor shifted from red to amber. Token verified. Admin override enabled. I slipped back into the system like a surgeon finding the pulse beneath torn muscle. Commands cascaded across the screen: manual fan activation, partial airflow bypass, thermal reset. The screams of the overheated machinery softened, then steadied. Temperature readings dropped slowly, reluctantly, but steadily. Holt leaned closer. "Is the core stable for now?" I said. "But this isn't just overheating." Look, I pulled up the security logs, projecting them onto the auxiliary monitor. Foreign IP signatures, unauthorized command injections, repeated attempts to bypass encryption, an installation attempt for a remote admin tool so insecure it bordered on criminal. Holt's jaw tightened as he read. "Your CFO allowed this, he paid for it," I corrected. Holt's voice dropped to a level that felt like a verdict. "This is no longer an incident. It's negligence bordering on national risk." I nodded toward the cooling server core. "And we're not done yet. This is only the aftermath. The real damage is still inside." The core was cooling, but the room still buzzed with the raw electricity of crisis. Holt stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the logs I'd pulled up. Each line of data was another nail in Lucas Brandt's professional coffin. "You see this pattern," I said, highlighting a sequence of repeated access failures. They tried 3 credential formats, none compliant with federal standards. Then they attempted lateral movement through a workstation, which means they had no understanding of enclave segmentation. Holt studied the screen. "And this?" he asked, pointing to a string of jagged red warnings. That, I said, is the exact moment they installed the remote admin tool. It triggered the quarantine protocol and forced the thermal lockdown. A low, humorless sound rumbled from the general's chest, something between disbelief and simmering fury. "Miss Reed," he said, "this is gross negligence." "It's worse," I replied. "It's documented negligence. Behind us." Two federal forensic specialists entered quietly, wheeling in hardened cases. One nodded to Holt. "General, we've completed the preliminary review of the executive floor. There are missing logbooks, shredded network reports, and someone attempted to wipe traces of the onboarding vendor." Holt's expression tightened. "Let me guess," I said. "The cleaning crew didn't shred those reports. Lucas did." The specialist nodded. "We recovered fragments from his office bin." I exhaled slowly. Trying to erase federal compliance documents wasn't just desperation, it was the kind of action prosecutors salivated over. Holt stepped closer to me, his voice low. "Do you believe this was intentional concealment, General?" I answered. Lucas was arrogant, reckless, and deeply uninformed. But he wasn't subtle. If he meant to hide this, he did it with the grace of a man blindfolded in a glass house. Holt didn't disagree. He turned to one of his aides. "Find Mr. Brandt, now, and place him in a holding room until federal investigators arrive." The aide nodded and hurried off. I returned my attention to the terminal. The system was stabilizing, but pockets of corrupted access logs blinked across different sectors. "These entries here," I said, pointing to a cluster of anomalies, "shouldn't exist. They weren't generated by the offshore team." Holt frowned. "Meaning someone inside Helios attempted to bypass internal access controls before the meltdown began." His gaze hardened instantly. "An insider or," I said, "someone trying to cover their tracks before the system shut down." The general's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Find me every workstation that touched these timestamps. No one leaves this building until we have answers." As agents moved with renewed urgency, Holt looked back at me. "Miss Reed, you've given us clarity, but now I need confirmation. Can you prove, unequivocally, that these failures originate from decisions made by Lucas Brandt?" I paused. Then I tapped a key. A single red highlighted entry appeared. "Access change, requested by Lucas Brandt clearance. Level insufficient action, override attempt, failed logged for federal review." I turned to the general. "Proof enough?" His jaw set. "More than enough. His career ends tonight." They found Lucas not in the executive suite, not consulting with legal, not even attempting to help the response teams. He was hiding in an empty break room, pale, sweating, hunched over a laptop he clearly didn't know how to use. When two agents escorted him to the incident conference room, he looked less like a CFO and more like someone who'd wandered into a battlefield without armor. Holt stood at the center of the room like a monolith. The moment Lucas entered, the general's gaze sliced through him. "Mr. Brandt," Holt said, "we have reviewed the initial findings." Lucas swallowed, gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. This was a vendor malfunction. He blurted out, "A miscommunication, a transitional glitch." Holt didn't blink. "Is that your official statement?" Yes. "They weren't following our instructions. They weren't trained properly. It's not my fault. Your system, Mr. Brandt." Holt's voice went quiet. "Dangerous. The system is not on trial. You are." Lucas flinched. I projected the access logs onto the wall screen, each damning line illuminating the room with cold, technical precision. Foreign login attempts, unauthorized reroutes, malware triggering behavior, access override failure under his name. Lucas stared at the wall as though the words were physically striking him. That can't be right. That tool wasn't supposed to trigger anything. It was supposed to increase responsiveness." I raised an eyebrow. "A free remote admin tool downloaded from the open web, used on a federal enclave, Lucas. That isn't responsiveness. That's negligence bordering on an actionable offense." His eyes darted to the agents. I didn't know, they said it was a standard tool, who I asked sharply. Your offshore team. The ones you contracted without clearance checks, without notifying Cyber Command, without approving vendor security screening. Lucas opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Holt stepped forward. You attempted to force override access into a defense-linked network. You disposed of a federal authentication token. You destroyed internal documents relevant to compliance monitoring, and you failed to report your staffing changes to DoD oversight. Lucas shook his head violently. You can't pin all of this on me. I was trying to cut costs. That's my job. The board wanted reductions. The board, Holt said, did not instruct you to violate federal procedure. A federal investigator placed a folder on the table in front of Lucas. Mr. Brandt. These are witness statements from your staff confirming you ignored repeated warnings about clearance requirements. Several emails show you explicitly dismissed concerns about federal protocol. Lucas's knees nearly buckled. This is unreal, he whispered. I thought you thought wrong, I said calmly. And now the entire company is at risk because you believed expertise was optional. Holt nodded toward the agents. Mr. Brandt will accompany federal investigators for further questioning. His access is revoked. Effective immediately. Lucas looked at me one last time, not with anger, but with a hollow disbelief. You could have warned me, he whispered. I met his gaze evenly. I did. You just didn't listen. The agent stepped in, and Lucas Brandt's career ended exactly the way he built it, through his own refusal to understand the systems he was responsible for. By dawn, Helios Defense Analytics no longer resembled a corporation. It resembled a crime scene recovering from a near catastrophe. Federal agents moved with quiet efficiency across the building. Technicians scrubbed every terminal clean. Forensic officers sealed evidence containers with unbroken precision. And somewhere in a windowless interview room, Lucas Brandt was learning painfully, irrevocably, that budgets may bend, but federal protocol does not. General Holt and I stood in what used to be Lucas's office. Now stripped of anything that suggested ownership, morning sun cut clean lines across the floor, illuminating the space like a stage set for a new act. You saved a federal simulation grid, Holt said, and prevented a full breach designation. I prevented the consequences of someone else's arrogance, I replied. He gave a small nod, one that carried more weight than praise. The department wants you leading the recovery phase, he said. Independent status, full authority, federal rate. A door that Helios slammed shut was now being opened by the Pentagon. I turned toward the window, looking down at the employees gathered outside. Some pointed up when they saw me. Others simply watched. The unspoken question, clear, are we safe now, for the first time that night? I felt something loosen in my chest. Holt placed a folder on the desk, my contract, my clearance reinstatement, and a letter of commendation. Miss Reed, he said, this was never about losing your position. It was about proving why you should have never been removed in the first place. I closed the folder. Then let's rebuild this correctly. As Holt exited, leaving me alone in the sunlight-filled office, I noticed the trash bin still held the cracked authentication token Lucas discarded. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and placed it on the desk. A reminder of the night a CFO tried to save money by removing the wrong person and ended up destroying only himself. Sometimes the moment you're pushed aside is the moment you finally realize your own worth. I've learned that expertise, responsibility, and ethics always trump arrogance. What resonated with you most about this story? And where are you hearing it from? Share your thoughts, don't forget to comment, like, send the video to someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel to see what's next.